So I've mentioned them a couple of times by now, and what exactly does a faction mean? What are they? Well, there are 15 groups in the city of Sigil that are defined by their philosophical perspective. But it's not just philosophy, it's sort of like an all-encompassing worldview or Weltanschauung about religion, politics, philosophy, good, evil, law, chaos, and most importantly, the secret mysteries of the universe. All of the factions in the game are dedicated to finding what is the ultimate truth in the galaxy, what is the ultimate secret, what are the really big questions, thinking the really big thoughts. What does it all mean? It's not like they're a symbol of good or evil. It's sort of like in the real world. Nobody in the real world is going to say that, oh, I'm a good person or I'm an evil person. Well, they might say good, but they're certainly not going to say evil. They're not the bad guy. They're all defined differently by their worldview. It's difficult to describe en masse what each one of them means, so I'm going to go individually into each faction. But the meaning of the faction and what their philosophical perspective is so complex and difficult that depending on who you ask, it can be a completely different answer. You know, one group that is opposed strongly to one faction is going to say that they're evil, they're horrible, they're monstrous, and they should be wiped out. But that faction itself would say that the opposite side are the bad guys, and on like that. The meaning of the factions is in the eye of the beholder. Now, these 15 factions are a wonderful political aspect that has been added to the game that was sorely lacking in other areas of Dungeons & Dragons. The infighting between the different groups and between the different organizations in Sigil is so exciting and so interesting. They always form some part of a campaign, usually an attempt by one group or another to influence the world or influence the planes sets up an adventure. The purpose behind the factions is to, as I said, discover the secret meaning of the universe, but also to spread their philosophy throughout the rest of the world. Pretty much all of the factions would like everyone in the world to follow their perspective, and all of them use different means to go about it. Some do virtually nothing and hope other people will come along to their side. Others want to go to war and force people and order them to go to this side. Some of the groups are, some groups may be described as terrorists, and that group itself would describe it as freedom fighters. You never really know exactly what one group is based on just one perspective. Each of the factions tends to play an official or unofficial role somewhere in the game. For instance, one of them, the Bleak Cabal, runs the madhouse and the orphanages and soup kitchens in the city. Another one are basically the equivalent of the police. Another are prison guards and bounty hunters. There are also unofficial roles like the anarchists, who function as political agitators and terrorists, depending on your view of what they are. And some of them are more inner-focused and focused more on the philosophical aspects of transforming an individual person into something greater. All the things I mentioned, like religion, philosophy, politics, all bleed into the middle of what the factions mean, what they want, and what they see as their vision that is going to be realized for the multiverse. Above all, the factions bring complexity to the Planescape universe. They bring a sense that you're really fighting to understand a mystery, and that these people are trying as hard as they can to get to that mystery. And they weave in all of this strange political, religious, and potentially very, very violent worldviews in what they're saying. All of the factions would like the entire planes to be going along with what they believe. And if they ever got that kind of power, that might be terrible. It might be more important to have a multiplicity of factions depending on your belief. Working for the factions in the game is one of the easiest ways to get a plot hook going, because you can set characters against one another, or having to work with one another, or having to make complex moral choices based on what exactly they believe, or how they interpret their particular philosophy, and who they should work with in the factions. Not all of the factions are fanatically opposed to one another. Some of the factions go along very well with one another. In fact, they work together every single day. They just have somewhat skewed visions, but overall maybe 70 to 80% are very similar and can go along with one another. For instance, the Doomguard, the Dustmen, and the Anarchists and the Bleak Cabal have a very fatalistic and destruction-oriented view of the universe, whereas the Harmonium, the Governors, and the Fraternity of Order have a very order-focused and law and very Ronald Reagan-esque law and order-focused look at the world. And they can work together and they can fight one another and get engaged in something called the Kriegsstands. The Kriegsstands, or war dance in German, is a kind of war of assassins from the Dune universe, an undeclared war that's going on constantly. The Lady of Pain, in her magnificence, has decided that open warfare between the factions is not going to be allowed, but they engage in this constant low-level, slow-burning kind of violence and antagonism and plotting and scheming against one another all the time. And this kind of undeclared, partisan-type guerrilla warfare going on between the groups is absolutely fascinating and really exciting. All of the factions have different realms outside of Sigil where they have power. For instance, with the Bleak Cabal, it's in Pandemonium, the realm of crazies. For the Anarchists, it's Carcerai, a prison plane where the Titans are imprisoned, and where people who have been exiled from other dimensions go. So there's a lot of disaffected, mean-spirited, angry plotters that live there that suit the Anarchists perfectly. The factions really get at the absolute center of what the Planescape universe is about, which is getting to know the dark, the mystery, the secret, and they all have different ways of going about it, and how you choose to help or hinder that is going to define your experience playing the game. And the factions are just another one, probably one of my favorite parts of the entire Planescape universe. It's absolutely great and adds this endlessly interesting element to it that's always fun to be a part of.